Hi, so I just wanted to outline a clear distinction which I think is helpful for most guitar students, in fact I say students probably of any craft or art, and that's to make a distinction between practice and performance, or, you know, the doing of what you're doing. For music, obviously practice and performance is applicable, or practice and playing. Um, so, I mean, this distinction is best expressed, I think, by, I think it's a, trying to remember now, Jerry Bergonzi, I think, came up with this phrase, which is practice like a scientist, play like a drunk. And what he meant by that is not literally get inebriated in order to play, but play like a drunk gives you an idea of the kind of mental relaxation and openness, I suppose, which playing should have. Practicing like a scientist gives you that sense that it should be logical, definite, mindful, and precise. Um, in fact, you know, you can read the autobiographies of scientists, and in their own words, they might have perhaps more of that playing thing than you might think. There is an intuitive side to science, but certainly from the point of view of playing music, that kind of makes sense. For instance, we can understand many practice activities, many practice activities as being essentially kind of mathematical. So working out voicings on the guitar, scales, working on your sight reading of rhythms, you know, puzzling out rhythms you can't read, for instance, would be a mathematical thing because you might count them, you know, for instance. Learning different rhythmic patterns, modulations, symmetrical modulations, that is, you know, working on fingerings for scales in all positions, analysis, harmonic analysis of lines you may have transcribed, or, you know, all this kind of stuff is very, you know, in a sort of debunked language of kind of pop psychology, um, very left brain, okay? And on the other side we have playing, and playing requires a lot more sort of openness and playfulness, as the thing suggests, and imagination and everything else. So the two things are very, you know, are kind of separate. There is some overlap. For instance, if I practice comping, I might not necessarily be super mindfully working on voicings and stuff, but I am working very much on, you know, how I might support a soloist. So that's kind of practice. That's a bit more like playing. But the number one thing that I think most guitarists who feel they're stuck in a rut is that they don't know how to practice. So when they pick up a guitar, they play, you know. And if you notice, all my videos are kind of, I mean, they are playful sometimes, but they're mostly about practice. They're mostly about things that you need to work on in quite a mindful way. Because that is often the way that you improve. But that's not to say that play and playing isn't important. In fact, it's very important. But I usually find that most, you know, people who've been playing the guitar for a while and know some basic, you know, basic stuff, they can even be quite accomplished players, feel that they're stuck in a rut. And this is usually the reason. They're just not used to working on things for small periods of time. And it is small periods of time, it's small focused periods of time, because you cannot focus the mind in a way that's required to practice forever. You have to take breaks. And depending how long your practice sessions should actually be and how often you should take breaks really depends on who you ask. But an extreme version of that, I suppose, is the interleaved practice technique suggested by, well, I mean, I can't remember, I think it's Noah something or other. And sorry, I can't remember the names of the researchers, but I'll attach it below. It's something that's gaining a bit of traction, I think, in the music world. It's popular in sports psychology, and maths tuition, I think, and you have like short 3 to 5 minute practice sessions of different stuff that you interleave and you come back to over and over. And that apparently is more effective over the long term than, you know, just blocked practice where you might practice scales for an hour. Anyway, it's worth a look. There's a Troy Grady video, in fact, on it, which I might attach to if I can find it. And I'll also attach to the paper. So that's one extreme way of doing it. Everybody practices that way, and I'm still uncertain as if that's the best way to practice, but I certainly had a lot of fun doing it. And it's easy to get stuck on something and just practice that one thing, you know, going like, oh, I'll just do it again, I'll get it this time. Actually, this is a good way to practice, so I'd recommend it, or recommend trying it at least. Now, that's all great. I just wanted to talk a bit about, so like practicing is one thing, playing is another. Now, Another thing that you're going to find, which is kind of a big thing for a lot of people, is that the stuff that you practice isn't going to show up in your playing for a while. Okay? It has to become intuitive, it has to become part of your bloodstream. Now, this might not actually take that long, or it might take ages. It depends on the thing, and it depends on how quickly you learn it and how you practice it, I guess, you know. So I would say that one of the most important things about playing gigs is to completely relax any expectations you have of your practice showing up in your playing. It won't. It won't for ages. And that's just the way it is. In fact, attaching any expectations to your performance at all is in general a very bad idea. You are going to need sometimes when you play music, especially if it's difficult music, to concentrate in that very scientific way. But ultimately, that's never ideal. The ideal mode of performance is always one of relaxation and openness. Hal Galper has an excellent phrase for it, which is distracted concentration, which is, he relates in a story in forward motion. Basically, he was playing at a bar or a restaurant, and one of the patrons comes over and talks to him. And I think a lot of professional musicians, most of us have had this experience. So you're sitting there playing away, somebody's talking to you, and you're like, yeah, sure, I'll have the fish, please, and yeah, no, maybe not the eggs, you know, and a glass of red wine, please. Thanks very much, lovely. You know, and you're playing and you're having this conversation. Somebody comes up and says, oh yeah, oh, great, yeah, oh yes, yeah. Oh, you like Bill Evans? Yeah, fantastic. Me too. Yeah, you know, whatever it is, or just like. Yeah, sure, we'll turn down. Sorry, let us know. You know, or whatever it is. You know, usually it's the last is the most likely conversation you're going to have. And you're playing away, and your fingers are just moving like that, you know, on autopilot, and music's coming out. And Hal Galper sort of said that his music that came out when he was doing that was better than what his playing was normally. So he quickly realised that maybe that sort of distracted sort of concentration thing was actually a very powerful tool. Now, this takes us onto a sort of area which could be roughly sort of called really metaphysics, because there are traditions in the world where this sort of thing is thought of as being a way of accessing the spirit world. And in traditional, well, I say traditional, but like basically for most of the human race's existence, we've had a sense of being in communication with spirits, because that's the way people modelled it. It's like literally the original meaning of the word genius is spirit, guiding spirit. It's in Greek. There's a very similar term, which is I think it's called daemon or daimon. I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced. Transliterations vary, which obviously is the root of the word demon. Which it doesn't have a negative connotation, but it's quite funny to think that in the ancient times, people actually thought creative people were being possessed by demons. You know. So perhaps we might talk about a guiding spirit. If the spirit moves me, you know, is a good piece of. I suppose kind of a way of phrasing that. And today we might talk about flow experiences, or we might talk about the zone. We're less likely to talk about actually the idea of being seized or controlled by deities. But, you know, many times when you think of creative artists talking about their process, they might say something like, well, you know, I was writing the novel and my characters took on a mind of their own, you know, or... yeah, in the words of Stravinsky, he's talking about the right. He's saying, I am the vessel through which the right passed, the rite of spring. So, you know, like that kind of idea of surrendering to some, obviously if you're conventionally Christian, or you know, you might see that as God guiding you, and if you're into Buddhism, you might see it as an expression of that, you know, and so on. And in fact, I think many of the kind of alternative religions that sort of became popular in the 1960s and 70s, such as, you know, obviously Buddhism and, you know, Sufism and all kinds of what we might think of as New Age beliefs, are a response to that, you know, as conventional sort of traditional religion kind of retreated more culturally at that point. But traditional religion does also have a idea of this, theologically speaking. So it's an interesting, I mean, obviously I could go on about the philosophy for ages. It's an interesting thing to think about. It's very kind of at odds with the modern world, where we imagine we're sort of creatures of will, sort of, you know, kind of directing our actions. But I think in music, you have to kind of develop a sense of surrender to something. And it's like when you're improvising, you have to put your mind in a state where something else can come in, take over, and do what it needs to do. And of course, you know, the practice you do is a preparation for that. But perhaps we are so used to practicing in a very mathematical way that we can maybe forget that ends when you enter the realm of performance and you start actually playing music. Anyway, that's a really, you know, I ended up in a slightly kind of philosophical, almost woo-woo space there. But in a concrete sense, practicing in that way, making a really firm definition, I am practicing now, I am playing now, is one of the best things I think that's happened to me in my music. And although it is not always possible to make that demarcation as strongly as I would like, just due to various reasons, sometimes I have to concentrate in a very specific way on the gig if if it's music I'm not totally familiar with. And you know, sometimes I just practice and, you know, noodle away without really kind of concentrating on anything. I think bearing those two different things in mind, that dichotomy, has really helped me become more effective. Anyway, let me know what you think, post below. There are many examples of these ideas being expressed by many different musicians. I mean, Kenny Werner's a big one, for instance, and I've avoided really talking about him, even though his book Effortless Mastery is kind of the one that introduced a lot of musicians to these ideas. But really, this goes right back, and it's kind of a deep sort of area. I think, by the way, that some of the musicians who are most kind of comfortable with this are drummers, which is interesting. There's a very deep tradition in all of humanity about the relationship between drums and what ancients would have called the spirit world, which we might now call flow or trance experiences. And they seem to be often the happiest sort of dealing with that kind of stuff. But all of us can learn it, I think, by playing music. Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below.